The disgraced entertainer Rolf Harris dies aged 93. He was once one of the most popular showbiz stars on TV, but his reputation was left in tatters after he was unmasked as a serial paedophile. Also this lunchtime, a call for calm in Cardiff after riots overnight. The Prime Minister describes the violence as appalling. The riots began after a fatal crash that killed 2 teenage boys.
In a banging, it was like, I know it's my car. I know it is.
People on the grass shouting, screaming at the police, effing and blinding, and then they just threw all the rubbish, set fire to it.
The search for Madeleine McCann at a Portuguese reservoir. We'll have the latest. The new student migration visa rules from a Home Secretary under pressure over her conduct, and
the public will expect the department to protect its own. Sweep this under the carpet. Don't.
the A-list actor heading back to Ramsay Street for the Neighbours reboot.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. The convicted sex offender and former entertainer Rolf Harris has died at the age of 93. The Australian-born star was freed from jail in 2017 following a string of convictions for sex offences involving underage girls. The revelations shattered the legacy of a man who had become one of the country's most beloved celebrities. Neil Connery now on his rise and fall.
Do you have anything to say to your victims, Mr. Harris?
When it came, Rolf Harris's fall from grace was rapid and dramatic. Convicted as a child sex offender, there was no way back for this former children's entertainer.
Feet all together now, tie me kangaroo down, sport, tie me kangaroo down.
His career spanned 7 decades, but away from the camera, he was a sexual predator, exploiting his position to abuse his victims.
Kids and water, they love it. Rivers.
Harris was trusted. He taught generations of children to swim. In 1985, he was even the face of a campaign warning of the dangers of child abuse.
You're giving them advice, go and tell an adult that you trust. And in a lot of cases you'll find that adults maybe don't believe you.
Mr. Rolf Harris.
The Australian-born painter and presenter was awarded with an MBE, OBE and CBE. He was also presented with a BAFTA Fellowship. In the years before his crimes emerged, his career powered ahead. In 2005, he was commissioned to paint Queen Elizabeth.
You're okay with the smell of turpentine, I hope?
Well, we'll tell, won't we, soon?
He performed at the 2012 Diamond Jubilee concert.
As his young playmate said.
One of his victims, watching at home, decided to go to the police. It came as the Metropolitan Police led Operation U-Tree into sexual abuse allegations against paedophile Jimmy Savile and others was about to begin. Harris's victims felt empowered to come forward. He was convicted on 12 counts of indecent assault between 1968 and 1986. One conviction was later quashed. One of his victims was his daughter's friend, with whom he'd had a sexual relationship. He wrote to the girl's father in 1997, claiming his actions were from a feeling of love and friendship. Another victim spoke to ITV News about her fury at his behaviour.
He's a nasty man who took advantage of his position, exploited that to the very utmost.
Why won't you apologise, Mr. Harris?
Throughout his trial, Harris never apologised to his victims. Tonya Lee was 14 when Harris assaulted her.
I hate that he's ruined my life and that he doesn't even acknowledge it.
On the morning he was sentenced, he was seen at the rear of this boat as he began his journey from his luxury Berkshire home. He was given 5 years and 9 months. The judge told him his reputation was in ruins and that he had no one else to blame but himself. He was released on licence from Stafford Prison 3 years later. His health began to deteriorate in recent years. Behind the public face of one of Britain's best-known celebrities lay a terrible darkness which defines his legacy. For his victims, the performer's friendly public face could not have been further from the reality. Neil Connery, ITV News.
The police, the council and religious leaders are calling for calm in Cardiff after riots overnight. The Prime Minister described the scenes as appalling and unacceptable. Yesterday evening, 2 teenage boys were killed in a crash in one of the city's suburbs. No one yet knows the cause of what happened next, but around 150 people were involved in the violence that saw cars set on fire, rocks and fireworks thrown at police and several officers being injured. It went on until the early hours. Martha Fairley has the latest.
In the aftermath of a night of riots in the Ely neighbourhood of Cardiff, this morning residents faced the grim reality. Streets blocked by debris and vandalised cars. The remains of a fridge still smouldering on the tarmac. Charred ground where vehicles were set on fire, while their petrified owners hid inside. A doorbell camera recorded the moment Jane Palmer's car went up in flames.
I could hear him effing and blinding and banging. It was like, I know it's my car. I know it is.
My daughter woke us up, we could just shout, and there was people on the grass shouting, screaming at the police, effing and blinding. And then they just threw all the rubbish, set fire to it. And then they took up, I don't even know what they hit your car with.
It was like a bomb. My God, you know. And it exploded. And they were trying to fire that white car and these taxis over there. But luckily, police officer, you know, saved these 2 cars, you know.
South Wales police were called to a road traffic accident on Snowdon Road in which 2 teenage boys died shortly after 6 o'clock last night. But it's thought false rumours on social media that they'd been killed after a police chase soon led to frightening scenes of violence and large-scale disorder.
There's 2 going off.
A crowd of 150 people threw bricks and fireworks as police in riot gear tried to bring the situation under control. Several arrests were made, and police say more are expected to follow as they investigate the circumstances of the riots.
There are lots and lots of different accounts on social media of what is supposed to have happened, and according to the police, they are not accurate. This is the thing, I think these days news gets around the world very quickly, but so can misinformation get around the world very quickly, and it can sometimes trigger people to react in the sort of way we've seen. So I'd advise, you know, everybody stay calm. There'll be a proper investigation and the facts can be found out properly.
This morning, teams of workers from Cardiff Council have been clearing the debris and trying to restore some form of normality to the streets of Ely and a community shaken by the events of last night. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
We can go live now to the city and join our Welsh reporter Rhys Williams. What's the latest?
Well, Nina, it's much calmer and quieter here this afternoon, certainly compared to those remarkable images we saw in Martha's report there. The burnt out cars and wheelie bins and broken up paving slabs that were thrown at the police have been cleared away, and there have been renewed calls for calm and for the facts to be established, because as we heard in that report, rumours began to circulate in the crowd that these 2 teenage boys were sadly killed in some kind of police chase. Of course, police since said that they were called to the incident after it had happened.
In speaking to people who live there, what have they been telling you?
Yes, I've spoken to many people, Nina. Lots of them, of course, very angry and upset with what happened, although most of them were unwilling to speak with me on camera because, as they described it, they were worried about repercussions. I spoke with one resident here, a mother of 2, who told me that she's adamant she's going to leave the area as she was so terrified from what she and her daughters had to look at through their windows last night. Some people I spoke with were critical of the police managing to control and escalate the situation, although I must say that most of the residents on this street were praising the bravery of the police, who spent hours being pelted with missiles. And as I mentioned earlier, Nina, there have been calls, of course, for the full facts to be established and for calm here in the area.
Rhys Williams, thank you. Early this morning, police divers in Portugal began to search a reservoir 30 miles from where Madeleine McCann disappeared. The British 3-year-old went missing in 2007 on a family holiday. The prime suspect in the case is a German sex offender. Officers from Germany, Portugal and the UK are working together at the site. Our correspondent Emma Murphy is there. What more can you tell us, Emma?
Well, the search has been going on since the early hours this morning. They really got underway in earnest at around 9 o'clock when we saw a number of officers on the bank just over there behind me. They started to break the ground using pickaxes and created long lines leading down towards the water. And they've been studying that ground and taking samples from there over the past few hours. Now, of course, this is an operation that's led by the German police because they have in custody the person that they believe is responsible for the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. And there is a feeling, therefore, that this search that's going on over the next 48 hours is intelligence-led because, of course, this area was searched back in 2008 in an independent assessment. Now, Jim Gamble is a child protection expert. He's a former police officer, and a few years ago he was asked by the government to conduct a review into how the Madeleine McCann investigation was conducted. This was his view of this latest search.
The German authorities are positive. I think they have information that quite rightly they're not sharing with the wider public. And that's why it'll be interesting to see whether this search is focused and very deliberate or whether it's simply, needle in a haystack searching everywhere. I think it's going to be focused and deliberate.
That focused and deliberate emphasis that we heard there from Jim Gamble is something that we've seen with our own eyes out here this morning, because there's 4 teams and they do seem to be in a very concentrated area. They're not giving any updates on what they're finding, if they're finding anything, but they are expected to be here later this afternoon and into tomorrow. They will then decide whether or not they need to extend this search time.
Emma Murphy, thank you. The Home Secretary under pressure over her conduct and her policies this lunchtime announced a new plan to cut migration to the UK. Most international students will no longer be able to bring their families into the country. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is at Westminster. Carl, how much difference could this make to net migration?
Well, it certainly has the potential to make a difference. The Prime Minister's official spokesman said today it was the most significant tightening of migration policy in recent years, and certainly it does target an area that has expanded massively over the last 3 or 4 years. The government says the number of dependents coming with international students has gone up 8-fold from 16,000 in 2019 to 136,000 last year. So this is clearly a big area. Certainly, if the government is to achieve the Prime Minister's aim of bringing down net migration, they've got to do something, because it has been rocketing since the pandemic. And on Thursday, we will get more net migration figures, which are again expected to show a record high. Now, this measure was reported to be one of those under consideration, but that the Home Secretary herself wanted to go much further. For example, stopping students being able to stay on after their courses for a couple of years. That's not happening. That is a battle she seems to have lost.
And Carl, her position is still uncertain this lunchtime.
Yeah, that's right. The Prime Minister is still deciding whether or not to launch an investigation into whether or not she improperly asked civil servants to get involved in her handling of a speeding issue. He has spoken to her, he's spoken to his ethics advisor, he's asked for more information, and I expect him to tell us whether or not he will launch that investigation pretty soon, in all likelihood before Prime Minister's questions tomorrow.
Carl Dinnan, thank you. Food inflation has fallen slightly for a second month, according to the latest figures, but that'll be little comfort to anyone doing a supermarket shop right now. It means prices are still rising, just at a slower rate. So overall, we're paying an extra £833 a year for what we eat. The government was warned today food prices are set to overtake energy bills as the epicentre of the cost of living crisis. So will the Chancellor meeting food manufacturers today to discuss the issue help? Here's our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks.
It's become an unavoidable part of the weekly shop, noticing how much more the same items are costing when you get to the till. These shoppers this morning would welcome the government doing something about it.
It's gone crazy. I just bought some very few things and it cost me £9. I couldn't believe it.
I had to cut back a bit, but also go for cheaper labels for the saving the money, you know.
It's inflation. Don't know what you can do about it, really.
The latest figures for May showed food prices are 17.2% higher than the same period last year. Although that is a slight fall on the previous 2 months, it still means an extra £833 on the average household food bill. The average cost of 4 pints of milk, for example, has come down by 8p since last month, but is still 30p higher than this time last year. Today, the Chancellor is meeting food manufacturers to ask them to help bring prices down. The Food and Drink Federation insists there are many reasons behind the rises.
The inflation that food and drink manufacturers have experienced has been really broad-based. So it's really been across every part of their production. So we've seen big rises in the cost of ingredients, but also energy, packaging, transport. That has fed into wage rises. We've also seen a drop in the value of the pound, and that increases the cost of imports.
Food prices have not risen so far since 1977, when James Callaghan was Prime Minister and food inflation was at nearly 22%. The current Governor of the Bank of England admitted today they hadn't expected food prices to stay so high, but that inflation overall had peaked.
I do stand by the view that it has turned the corner, and I was very careful when I said that a few months ago, that we were seeing the first signs of that, because obviously the peak was 11%, and we have seen the benefits already of some of the benefits of energy prices, but it is higher than we expected to be, and there are two underlying reasons for that we see in the data. One is food, and the second one is some goods, particularly clothing and footwear.
As shoppers count the cost in their pockets, the Chancellor will also discuss with the competition watchdog whether food companies are making excess profits. Whatever the talks achieve, it's likely to be months before we see any difference at the tills. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
And as consumers continue to feel the pain, the IMF predicted today interest rates may have to rise and will remain higher for longer because of high inflation. It did predict the UK will avoid a recession this year as it upgraded its forecast for the economy. Our economics editor Joel Hills joins me now from the Treasury. Overall, a positive note, but this will hit borrowers hard, won't it?
Look, I think in the past the Chancellor's sort of complained that the International Monetary Fund has underestimated the UK economy, and this morning the IMF admitted that our economic prospects look a little brighter than they did even last month, and look a whole lot brighter than it was forecasting back in January, when it said that the UK would be the only advanced economy to contract this year. The IMF's forecast of recession has been ditched. It now predicts that actually the UK economy this year will grow by more than Germany manages to. But don't get too hung up on a single year, said the IMF, pushing back against the narrative that the UK has been underperforming relative to the G7. She said that since 2020, the performance has actually been, in her words, quite good. Why the rethink on growth? Well, the IMF does think that falling energy prices, resilient demand, and note this, the Windsor Agreement that the government negotiated with the EU back in February are all contributing to lift growth somewhat. I say somewhat because the outlook for the next 2 years is really quite weak. It will be several years before living standards start improving, and the sting in the tail is over inflation. It's far more persistent than the IMF was expecting. Food prices are particularly problematic. Some further monetary tightening will likely be needed, says the IMF. Rates may have to remain higher for longer.
Joel Hills, thank you. Finally, this lunchtime, the Stella Stars returning to Ramsay Street for the all-new Neighbours. Guy Pearce left the soap in the 1980s to head for Hollywood. Alongside the likes of Kylie and Jason, he appeared in what we thought was the final ever episode of the Australian hit. But later this year, it's coming back, and so is he and another A-list actor. Here's Sally Biddle.
Mike and Jane were a neighbour's love story. Not on the scale of Scott and Charlene, but an enduring one nonetheless.
Look at you! Hey!
And in what we thought was the final episode last April, they were reunited and quickly moved into a Des Res on Ramsay Street to rekindle their romance.
The reality is I'm still in love with you.
But now the soap has been resurrected by Amazon Freevee, Hollywood star Guy Pearce, who started out as Mike, faces a dilemma of whether to return to Erinsborough, something he spoke about on an Australian podcast.
What do we do now? Because we're in the street, we're living in the street. And she said, well, I'm all right, because I'm on the show anyway. What are you going to do? I said, I don't know. So we're in the process of working it out. You may, because obviously if I'm going to extricate myself from the show, I have to do it in a, I want to do it sort of respectfully. And I wasn't just going to go, oh, well, bad luck. You had your chance. That was it, So there may be a little appearance or two.
I was only having a bit of fun.
With a string of hit films behind him, including Priscilla, Queen of the Desert and LA Confidential, Pearce is a man in demand, so no one yet knows how and when he will pop up down under.
You guys are up to something.
Pearce will be joined by fellow A-lister Misha Barton of OC fame, who it's reported has also signed up to the
That's it this lunchtime. The news where you are is next from me. Bye-bye.